We speak. Our words. We listen.
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 The perspective that you have that is different from most people, one is that you have an autistic child and you have had to navigate that autistic child through some of the different ways that autism professionals have tried to influence. So there's that mum who is trying to work through the best for their child, and it comes, from what it looks like, in opposition to some of the autism professionals out there.
Oh, yeah. Most of them.
Yeah.
Especially if they do things like ABA. Oh, yeah. I'm very vocal about that. Totally anti, yeah.
I have a project here that is controversial because we are dealing with the ABA community here over in the UK.
Okay.
We are speaking directly to them, and we are allowing them to come and make recordings with us.
Okay.
And in some ways, you could say that we are platforming the behavioural science community, and you hear the way that I describe that, behavioural science community. So that is a very vulnerable position that I have put this project in by doing that.
Okay.
And the reasoning that I have behind that is because there are already enough people who are creating the protest. There are already enough people who are ensuring that the perspective that behaviour modification and the creation of masking strategies within children is inappropriate, and other words that I am not going to say at the moment. Okay, there are other people doing that. And I have taken the rather controversial step of speaking to them directly and gaining some kind of trust and confidence in them that they will be able to speak freely. And it's only when they speak freely, in my opinion, that they will have any chance to access the autistic experience from our point of view. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that open dialogue is really very important. And there's a very fascinating man. His name is Scott Fraser.
We recently recorded with him, and he's going to be making a series of podcasts with us and work with us.
Brilliant. So that's what he does. He asks questions and allows everybody to speak, and he's fantastic. I learn a lot from him, and so, yeah, good. I think that's very important. And I also will speak to anybody. When I was in college, I did a research project, and it turned out it was in a behavior modification school, which was now, the name is ABA, but at the time it was called behavior modification. And I had firsthand experience of what it's like to be on the other end, right? And it didn't sit with me, particularly because I had worked with a young boy from the time when I was in high school and for a number of years, and we did child-centered approaches, and he was doing great. I lost track of him for a number of years, and then I found him.
Our conversations here on Autistic Radio are personal and informal. Please don't imply if somebody mentions an organisation, they're not representing that organisation. It's all personal comments. They speak with their own words for themselves. Welcome back to Autistic Radio. I want to emphasise to you, the listener, that it's a privilege for us to have your time. Your commitment to listening to us matters to us. I have somebody with me today to introduce in our short introduction series. Jacki Edry is the mum of an autistic person, and she's also written a book that I've started to read. It was only in the first few minutes of reading the book that I have to say that there was some emotion for me and some tears pricked in my eyes because of the feeling of empathy for one of the children that she described. I would like to just ask Jacki to tell you a little bit about what she's done, what she's doing, and what she sees the future. Hi, Jacki. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm greatly honored to be here. As you said, I'm the privileged parent of an autistic son and other neurodivergent kids with varying diagnoses, whether it be ADHD, dyslexia, Ehrlich syndrome, and all varying forms of neurodivergence. From the time I was in high school, and that was a really long time ago, I worked with kids on the spectrum, and my thesis in college also to do with programs for educating autistic kids. My son was born many years later. As he was growing up and the challenges that we face, not raising him, rather dealing with the systems that we had to deal with, education and advocating for his rights, I started to become a parent advocate, working with parents, training professionals. And then 11 years ago, I had a massive tumor discovered on my brainstem and had surgery, very dangerous surgery. When I woke up, all of my senses were scrambled. And I definitely became much more neurodistinct than I already was beforehand, especially with living with a sensory environment that was disorganized and frightening. And I had to learn how to walk, talk, function all over again. And what I discovered from being on both sides of the coin, whether it was a parent, caretaker, or professional, to now having a brain that was trying to cope with sensory dysregulation, disorganization in terms of my body and my brain, sometimes engage my mouth, words would get stuck, stutter, etc. That I was now on both sides of the coin, and I gained a lot of insights what it was like, because the things that I had been observing all along and thinking that I understood, now I was experiencing firsthand. And so what I decided to do was help others with those insights. And that's why I decided to write a book and start that journey of linking up with people from around the world and speaking and writing and blogging and doing everything I can to help facilitate understanding and improve the quality of lives for autistic or neurodivergent individuals and their families and caretakers alike.
That's quite a lot. That's quite a lot. Such an interesting situation. We're kind of reminding people here that neurodiversity covers the whole of humanity, but that the neurodivergent tag that we use covers people who have a significant difference from what we might call the majority population or the average. I'm not going to use the word normal. And yeah,
and I don't even know how average is, but yeah,
it's almost impossible. To find a term for the rest of everybody. We do have to say though that there is a certain group that are a little bit away in their own centre of things in the data. I think in a way what we're doing here, Jacki, is we're reminding people under this label that we use now of the neurodivergent group within neurodiversity covering the whole of the population, that the neurodivergent group includes people with a brain injury. And that people with brain injuries can experience life newly, often in ways that remind them of things like ADHD, autism, and the other versions of neurodivergence, yeah?
Absolutely.
So you're a recovering brain injury person. Having that tumour's been taken out, they've probably took out quite a section of your brain at the same time, I suppose.
No, I don't think so. But they took the tumor and some of the things around the tumor, and I actually still have a bit of tumor in my brain because because I couldn't remove it all because it was on my brainstem, and all the central nerves run through the brainstem, and some of them run through right the center of the tumor. I was left with physical disabilities and sensory differences. Fortunately, it was in an area of my brain that was not near my cognition, so my cognition wasn't affected. The first part of my book, I talk a little about me and about all different senses and give a lot of practical knowledge to help people understand what sensory processing is, and some tools to help people regulate, make their lives easier living with sensory processing issues.
The first thing that strikes me and is a curious thing about how you feel about the concept of brain plasticity, because when people have a trauma to their brain,
Okay.
we are often led to the idea that recovery and rebuilding various parts of a person's abilities is the brain adapting and different parts of the brain being used in different ways to compensate and change. It's a plasticity in the way that moldable, I think, is the way plasticity is used. Modifiable. So is that your experience?
Brains are, I have quite a bit of knowledge about brains, and I'm learning all the time, especially with the professor who was working with my son for many years. We're going to be launching some projects together, God willing, in the near future. But also in my experience, both are observing in the Feuerstein Institute in Jerusalem, where my son was. They have the Department for Brain Injury, but also in just working with kids over the years, whether or not be injury or just any kind of area that needs to improve. And brains build new connections all the time. I have seen people after terrible injuries, the brain was basically outside of their skull. Parents were asked to sign them out their organs, so they actually managed to recover. Their language, the center of the brain, let's say, was destroyed, and they now speak fluently. But it takes a really long time, right? It's a process. You need to work on brains. I've seen people at every age, no matter what. The Feuerstein, Professor Ruben Feuerstein, blessed be his memory's philosophy was, no matter what state you're in or what age you're at or whatever, you can always change and improve. And that is absolutely the case. I have seen it so many times, and I've experienced it firsthand. But you can't make it happen quickly. Neural pathways needs to be built and organized, and cognition needs to be organized, and sensors need to be organized. So all these things take a really long time. And I think one of the things that are very problematic in a lot of the ways, the treatments, the professionals, when they work, let's say, if you take an autistic kid that's nonverbal, and they want you to progress at a specific rate, and if you do it slower, then they think the treatment's not working. It's important to understand that these cognitive building blocks need to put in place, and they take a really long time. But once they're in place, then the sky can be the limit. But there's the absolute neuroplasticity out there. Absolutely.
Remember, I might take quite a long time to get my words together. I'm an autistic man, and you're going to experience quite long silences from me, okay? Just tolerate me on that.
Okay. I don't need to tolerate that. First of all, there's nothing wrong with that. Second of all, perhaps it has to do with auditory processing issues. My son has very severe auditory processing issues. We've got him low gain hearing aids, and it's changed his life completely. It's really helped him process what he's hearing and make sense of it, and sped up his ability to respond because his processing has improved incredibly. These are things I talk about to help people to realize and make their lives easier.
So from my point of view, I would like to try and simplify this for my own understanding. A person who's received trauma to their brain and the brain has been significantly changed, you're putting forward with time, the brain can adapt, plasticity of the brain, changes can happen. As though you're putting forward the proposition that an autistic child is analogous to a damaged brain, and that too, with time, can be modified, and its plasticity will mean that child will be able to adapt in certain ways to be less autistic?
I wouldn't use that terminology. I don't think that it's damage. I do think it's different. I think brains are so complex and there are different ways of thinking, communication. For example, my son, I know he thinks in pictures, not in language. He has fairly minimal verbal skills. He doesn't tend to speak in long sentences. But I know he's thinking, let's say he's got 2 languages, 3 languages, because he thinks in pictures, and he thinks in Hebrew, and then he thinks a little bit in English as well. And he's got auditory processing issues and all kinds of other issues. But I wouldn't use the word damaged. He's different. I think neuroplasticity will help him build new connections in his brain to make the areas that are having challenges that make his life difficult, to streamline those connections and make it easier for him. But I wouldn't go for the damage. I don't like the medical model, and I also think people's brains are different because some people think logically and some people think associatively, and some people think both, like me. I'm logical and associative, so I can be all over the place. And then sometimes people have a hard time following me, although it's very streamlined for me. We're all made up very differently. But when the differences cause challenges, or the person who's living with those differences to be uncomfortable, then we need to work on that to improve their quality of life, not to make them not appear what they are. My son is autistic, and he will always be autistic, but he can learn skills to make it easier for him to communicate what he wants to communicate and succeed in life. My brain is now different, and my sensitivities are hypo, and all kinds of, I have a lot of scrambled sensory input, but now that I have Irlen lenses and I know how to regulate things, I can make my quality of life much better. Curing an illness, and it's not damage, but it is different, and we need to find ways to allow a person to communicate as effectively as they can so that they feel good. Because if a person doesn't communicate effectively, it's frustrating, and to achieve their dreams and the quality of life that they're looking for. And then that's my aim, and that's my outlook about it.
I think as an autistic man, you will understand what I was trying to give you the opportunity to say, and I think you said it rather beautifully. There is no way in the world that I believe that your son is damaged, and there is no way in the world that I experience life believing that I am damaged at all. Okay?
Yeah, thank you. I was absolutely sure that you wouldn't think of it as damage, but unfortunately, the medical model, and unfortunately so many professionals, he's now 27, my son, and if I tell you the amount of times that we have had people say the most horrific things to us about him, or assume that he didn't understand anything because he couldn't speak, or they treated him as such. I'm definitely sensitive about that, and I also know what it feels like. I had very serious difficulty speaking after my surgery. Certainly for the first months, I was mostly quiet. My nerves are definitely on end as my brain was trying to reorganize itself. Waiting room, at a neurologist's office with my husband, and he just looks at my husband and says, "Oh, was she like this before her surgery?" And it's like, so I'm so used to having professionals, whether it be medical or educational professionals, that tend to see people who are neurodistinct as deficient or damaged. Just want to clarify for the people listening my viewpoint.
That's wonderful. There's a subject I want to broach with you. It's 3 letters. ABA. Can you give me a perspective on how ABA touched either your own life or your son's life or anyone around you, so that I can understand something about that context?
I have to think about it for a second how to answer that. That's a difficult question. When I was in high school, I worked with a young boy. We used to do child-centered educational setting with him, and he was a beautiful young kid. Working with him through play and things like that to teach him how to communicate. He was nonverbal, autistic, and I worked with him for a few years. And then I went to college, And I started working summer camp with autistic adolescents, and we used to do incredible things, whitewater canoeing. And these kids were nonverbal, most of them, and they had serious challenges, but we found that we could do almost anything with them in upstate New York, sitting, just wonderful things we did with them. And it was all very natural. All our interactions were very natural, and everything went with the flow, and we found they've developed beautifully. I worked with the same kids for 3 years. And I noticed that their exercise during the summer camps helped reduce some of their stimmings. I decided to do a study to see how exercise affects stimming for my thesis. I got accepted at a school, which was one of the first schools at the time. I'm talking 87, 86 actually. And it was a behavior modification school, which is now it was coined back then behavior modification, except now it's ABA. And I had no idea what this school was and what it was going to be like. In any case, I'm assuming I'm just going to go there and do my exercise program. And what happened was I went there, and lo and behold, that young boy that I'd worked with, and it was a completely different state, and it was years later, was in this school. And he was frustrated and angry and self-abusive, and he was still doing the same sort of things that we'd been doing with him when he was 5, and he was now 13. And it broke my heart. And also there was no spontaneity with those kids. It was say something, give them a task, give them an M&M, sign and speak. Nothing spontaneous could be. Everything was for reward. It just broke my heart. I was beyond shaken up, and so I changed my thesis to developing more child-centered, natural approaches to working with kids with autism, developmental disabilities. That's what happened way back then. And I was very, very firm after I realized. I was there for 6 months, and I learned how to do it and what to do, and I could not do it myself. I got out of there as quickly as I could because I just felt I couldn't be complicit to doing these things to these children that I didn't believe in. It was a very hard time in my life. And then years later, my son was born. And of course, ABA has developed into this whole industry, and people tried to convince me to do that with him. And I knew, and that was the blessing. That was, I really believe God really was looking out for us, because I had that experience beforehand. Because if I hadn't, he would have been turned into a very frustrated individual, and so would I. And we wouldn't have had the nice life that we have by not going down that route. The teaching of compliance and the not teaching of how to have normal social interactions, because everything is based on rewards or punishments or planned ignoring, or whatever it may be. Everything is for something, and there is no spontaneity in relationships. Doesn't facilitate building relationships. I've met many, many adults who have had experience with ABA who have been traumatized, seriously traumatized by it, and many kids who have undergone ABA who have no initiative. They don't initiate it because they're afraid to make mistakes, because you either do it right or you do it wrong. Life is a gray area. Most things aren't right or wrong. But so they're always waiting for someone to tell them what they should be doing, because they don't want to do the wrong thing. So I found it's a very painful topic for me, and I do speak out. If a person has sensory overwhelm and someone is forcing them to do something, it could break them. It could break them. It could break their spirit and could traumatize them. And that's been my experience with ABA, which is why I am vocal about it, and I don't have any hesitancy. People get angry at me that I am against it, but I've seen the damage firsthand.
Thank you, Jacki. I hope I didn't push you.
No, it's fine.
Now, there are some other words. There's the concept of the science of behaviourism, and I'm led to believe that behaviourism, a very new science, which tries to look at how human beings manifest through behaviour, and some would say there are different programs that come from behaviourism that are child-centred and supportive of the child. Is it the case for you that the word behaviourism is entirely wrapped up with the concept of ABA?
ABA is the new name, the more scientifically charted behaviorism. Behaviorism is something that came from, Skinner and Lovelace. As a person who has a great love of dogs and has had dogs all my life and worked with dogs and I've trained dogs, I very much felt when I was seeing things done with behaviorism, that was very much the way you work with the dog, right? You do this, you get a reward. And many times it's food. It ignores the humanity and it ignores the soul of the person. We are not stimulus response, which is behaviorism. We are human. We have souls. We have feelings. We're complex individuals. We have histories. We're just not a stimulus response. There's so much more involved for any decision we make or any reaction that we have. We're reducing a person into a system of behaviors of stimuli and response, then you are taking away a lot of their humanity and their soul. And if you insist that they function that way, they will eventually do it, but it will take away part of their humanity and their soul. That's the way I feel about it.
Thank you. When you were describing the application of ABA, it seemed to me that you were describing coercive control in action on children.
That was very the way the older forms of ABA were behavior modification.
Rewarding a child when it does the things that you're aiming for, this carrot and stick approach, the naughty step, all those kind of things. That is a description to me of coercive control that I thought we'd left behind in the past.
No.
And then the question I asked you was about whether there was any differentiation in your mind between the concept of behavioral science described by Skinner and ABA, and you immediately come back to say that as far as you're concerned, there is no differentiation between something people like to describe as behavioral science and ABA. Am I clear on that?
I think, again, it started, ABA stemmed out of that original Skinner type things, become more scientific. It's much more documented, charted, whatever, but it breaks people into little categories and checklists and tasks, rewards and punishment. The nicer ones, they don't do punishment, but it creates an artificial environment. It doesn't teach social skills in a manner that is natural, so that the person often comes out like robotic and after years of ABA and because they haven't learned natural social interactions. Things don't happen in such set environments or patterns, and then they don't necessarily transcend and generalize out of the setting, the clinical setting. My son was in elementary school. We never did ABA with him, obviously. But there was a woman that came into school and she started advising people, and she wanted to teach social interactions, which is the main reason he was in inclusion in school as a one-to-one assistant, even though he had a very big educational gap. We wanted to learn to be around kids that he can learn social interactions with them. So the woman wanted him, she was very behavioristic, and she said, let's teach him social stories. So I said, okay, how do you want to do that? And she said, well, we'll have his assistant teach him a number of lines of things to say. She could use the stories, and he's got to memorize these lines and then go up to other kids and say those lines. I said, wait a minute, what do you mean? Every time he sees a child, he's going to come up and say this line. So he's going to become like a programmed robot. Plus, you don't do that with, normal social interactions. You don't do that. But that's what she was trying to teach him. And I said, no way. Don't even think about it. I would assume as teaching social interactions doesn't have anything to do with that. And no. So that's the kind of things I find going on to date. And even though things get remarketed in different names and all this other stuff, anything that stems from that, I think, is problematic. And it's also used in sometimes in regular schools with kids where they start doing point charts with all this other baloney. And then I found my kids had behavioral problems when the teacher would start doing point systems for them to get a prize at the end of the week. And then you ask them to do a chore and they'd say, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to give me for it? Kind of thing. So anywhere that these things are used in a systematic way, in my opinion, creates a major problem. They're not spontaneous and they're not natural.
Repeating things is often quite annoying to people, but I'm still going to do it. As far as you're concerned, anything that associates with the original ideas or anything that is a science around the idea of behaviourism, behavioural science, is conflated with ABA that you have clearly described as a system of coercive control. Yes, is that correct? There's no other version.
There are a lot of versions, but the question is, what's the point? First of all, it takes away the person's identity and trying to shape them and mend them into something that they are not. Behavioral science is a huge thing. I mean, if you're talking about the kind of therapies done with an autistic child under any kind of behaviorist program, yes, I have a definite aversion to that, and I think it's all connected, and it's sometimes remarketed because there was a lot of backlash. But behavioral science can be about anything and not having anything to do with that, but just the study of how people interact with each other. But anything that is Skinner-like, love us-like, or stems from that, I believe, is the initial premise of trying to make people what they're not, and to teach people to mask, which has a tremendous negative effect on them in the long run, and causes burnout and causes feeling of failure and causes lack of self-image, positive self-image, and I can go on and on and on and on and on. I do have a serious problem with that. That's not to say that if a person, let's say, I'll just use my son for an example because it's easy. If his challenges as being autistic are getting in the way of his quality of life, I'm not going to say, okay, just sit in the corner all day and do what you feel like doing. But I won't go about it by the way you're talking about. Rather, meet him where he's at, communicate with him on things that are interesting to him, and gradually pull him to me and to interact with me by building trust and having fun and playing and being, natural, the way a typical baby would go through the different stages of development. So I would start with getting all those prerequisites into place and building cognitive building blocks and social building blocks and taking the time to do things slowly, because I don't want him to be in a situation where he can't communicate his needs and then he'll be frustrated. But to sit down and say the same word 50 times and memorize lists and lists of words, that has nothing to do with communication as far as I'm concerned. That has sitting in a room and learning lots of words and flashcards. But what does it have to do with real life? So I'll take him and walk down the street with him and point to every single thing that I see on the street and talk about it and its history and what it looks like and what you can do with him. And that's the way I'll teach him those words. But I'm not going to teach him with a bunch of flashcards and then get a prize for it. That doesn't make sense in reality. And I wouldn't do it to a per se regular child. If somebody would do that to me, I would probably get up and swat them. So why would I do it to a child who has a challenge of any way or a disability of any way, and he cannot make his need or he cannot protest in the way that typical child would protest if you're doing something to them that is damaging. That makes sense?
It makes perfect sense to me. So going back to the plasticity of the brain again, because it has been put forward almost in the Jesuit way. Give me a child at 7 and I'll give you the man. If you can train a child up until a point, it will always be with them, I think, is one of the interpretations of that. Returning to the plasticity of the brain, you're not saying that people don't have the opportunity and support to make changes, learn new skills, learn to be able to, I think what you said was communicate their need, and so they need methods and supports to be able to do that. You're not saying that there isn't a way to approach this, which means that the plasticity and adaptation of the brain can improve somebody's life. You're not saying that. But what you are saying is that everything to do with the word behaviourism is associated for you with this coercive control ABA that we've seen demonstrated again and again, stop the shock, ban ABA, and everything that looks as though it comes from a stem of behavioural science, in your mind, is a repackaging in the ABA industry that uses children and adults as fodder for an industry of money making. All of that in a nutshell. That's not putting any words in your mouth, is it?
You know, it's real hard to categorize me, and I'm sure that there are exceptions, and perhaps some people that are using some of the ABA techniques, who knows, maybe, you know, I don't know, but more or less, I guess. It's become like an industry. It's become an industry. It's become a cult in a lot of ways. And if you say anything or ask questions about it, then often people get attacked for asking questions about it. In the beginning, when I went and I was writing, and I was told, don't say anything about ABA. No one will want to buy your book. It'll put me on a blacklist and stuff like that. And I follow my truth. I don't care what anybody has to say. Really, if it doesn't sit well with my conscience, then I'm not going to say it or do it. You know what I mean? So I don't feel that's humanistic, and I see the way it's taught in schools. My daughter, a number of years ago, went to learn special education, and I saw what they were teaching her, and how she part of her training was learning about behaviorism and autism, and the things that I saw just made my hair stand up. So even though they say it might be more the new kinder form, I have yet to see that. I don't see that. Perhaps it exists, but I have yet to encounter it firsthand. And I don't see it teaching the skills that people need to give them the quality of life that they need.
Thank you, Jacki, for dealing with this difficult subject with me today on Autistic Radio. I hope that you have felt that what I have done here is listened and given you the opportunity to speak out your truth. And
Absolutely.
I think the listener will take in what they've heard and make their own mind up from what they hear.
Sure.
It's not up to us to direct them to what they think.
Yeah, I agree
There's
with that.
quite a lot more that I want to speak to you about, because I'm only on I'm not even on page 30 of your book yet.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a chance in the future that you will return to us here on Autistic Radio and talk a little bit more and expand upon the rest of your book?
I have to say that it has been fascinating and a pleasure to speak with you. Very, very interesting, and I've enjoyed this conversation and enjoyed speaking about difficult topics, because I think that it gives people the opportunity to learn and understand things from different perspectives. And then if we facilitate dialogue, then I think everybody benefits from hearing all different sides of things. So that you're not afraid to go down that road and ask difficult questions is fantastic. And keeping with that, I'd love to meet with you again and get to know you better and speak further and talk about whatever topics you think are relevant, for sure.
Autistic Radio is about us, it's for us, and it's from us. Autistic Radio is about you, it's for you, and it can be from you. We have every single Sunday drop-in, 4:44 PM every Sunday. That's not live, that's us getting together, us talking, community. Every Sunday, Harry leads a 555 PM, a discussion around the Facebook page that he creates. Involve yourself by suggesting what we should talk about next. Share it with Harry. And then the bigger picture. Advocate. Use us. Speak to the world. Your project, your idea, your enthusiasm. We have a whole range of different programs that will fit what you want. As far as listening goes, there's some challenging stuff out there. Because amongst the identity, the entertainment, and the community, we also make serious programs with autism professionals, challenging their ideas and bringing what you say in other spaces to them. A lot of those are difficult listens, but it's a holistic gathering. It comes all together. Autistic Radio is very varied. We need a favour. To encourage us, we need you to share us. When you share us, you give autistic people power. When you share us, you make us impossible to ignore. When you repost on LinkedIn and Facebook and anywhere else, you're advocating for everybody in the autistic community. So pick the things that you're happy with and get them out there. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you from all of us.